What is up, guys? Randomonium here. Today we're going to be covering all of the things you need to know for the 2018 Summer Split Fantasy LCS. I'll be going over a lot of statistics and basically going over like drafting strategies and things like that. And also, please be sure to check out the video description because I have my Discord link down there, so you can come join our Discord, talk about esports, and I'll also be posting the links to the fantasy leagues. I'll be doing probably around a dozen fantasy leagues this split, so you can definitely join one of my fantasy leagues, you know, try and beat me, and if you beat me, then I'll give you a nice little spiffy thing at the end of the season to go along with my Discord. I'll give you a little special tag in my my Discord that gives you different colored font and stuff. So if you're interested in that, definitely join one of my my fantasy teams. So as you can see on the screen, this is kind of like the master TLDR kind of thing for you guys. So if you want to take a screenshot, you can. I'm going to go into more detail about this, but basically I look at every single player and every single team on 3 different metrics. I look at them for their points, which is average points over the entire split. I look at them for their value, and their value is defined as how many points do they actually get, vice how many points should they have gotten based on how many games they won. And then their consistency is how much their value changes week to week. So teams that have a high consistency value are teams that are very predictable in their points, while teams with low consistency value or players with low consistency values are very unpredictable and could get, you know, really high points one week and really low points another week. So it depends on what you value the most. I personally value points, obviously number 1. Value number 2, I keep a track of value, especially for kind of those like sleeper picks. Value is very important for sleeper picks because if a team is doing poorly, they won't be seeing a lot of fantasy points, but their value will be high, which means that if they were to win, if they get on like a hot streak or they have a really good week, then they should score really high points that week. So it's a great way of predicting which teams are going to get like pop off on a particular week. And then consistency is really good for like who should be your starters, because you need to have that core team of people who you know you're going to get points from week in and week out. And then you can also see for consistency like who, you know, you might pick up for 1 week when he has a really, you know, a really promising week. Pick him up for 1 week and then you just drop him the next week. So we'll get into more of that with the pick ban strategy. I also want to cover what order you want to pick each one of your roles. So if you don't know, you pick one of each position. Those are your starters. You also have a flex and you have a team. So you basically have 7 spots that you play each week, and then you have 3 players on your bench, and you can basically trade week in, week out. But as soon as the first game for that particular region starts, you're locked. So like for EU, once the first EU game starts, none of the EU players can be subbed in or out, and the same for NA. So let's take a look at the statistics for the different positions. So we can see that for bot lane, AD carry, they average the highest points at 32.37 points with a standard deviation of 4.72 points per week. That is higher than every other role. The second highest would be mid at 31.01 points with a standard deviation of 3.62. So in general, you want to be trying to pick up your AD carries first because they're going to give you the highest point potential, and they also have the highest standard deviation, which means that if you don't get one of those top 80 carries, they fall off a lot faster as far as their point values are concerned. That said, if you're, say, like 6th pick in your particular league or something like that, and the first, you know, 5 people pick 80 carries, it might be better for you to pick a mid laner first, because then you can get like that top mid laner pick. So definitely for each draft it's going to be different. You need to adapt your playstyle depending on what other people pick. Second priority is probably mid lane at 31.01 points. Like I said, standard deviation of 3.62. They're basically your second carry on most teams. So you definitely want to try and pick them up early, either with your first pick or your second pick of the drafting phase. The other thing that you need to keep in mind is, of course, your flex pick. Your flex pick is most likely going to be a mid laner or a bot laner, so you want to pick up your second bot laner or your second mid laner pretty early in the draft. It doesn't necessarily need to be like your third pick, but you definitely don't want to wait until like the very end to pick up a second bot laner or mid laner. Usually your flex pick is going to score more points than your team and your support, and may score more points than your starting jungler or your starting top laner. So definitely keep that in mind when you're going through your pick strategy. I usually pick up my flex anywhere from 3rd to 5th, I believe, in most of my drafts. I might drop it to 6 if I like get some really good players in other positions. After that, jungle and top are kind of even, roughly. Top gets about 25.62 points per week, standard deviation of 4.55 points, and jungle gets 25.59 points with a standard deviation of 4.18. So you would want to have top lane more than jungle, but they're really so close that it doesn't matter that much. It's really more like which player you can get for that role. So yeah, those are kind of your 3rd, 4th priority. 5th priority is going to be your team. They get 24.48 points, standard deviation of 4.41, and support only gets 22.54 points, the standard deviation of 3.8. So that's kind of the general priority that we've seen in the previous split. I know that it differs from other splits in the past, but those are the stats that we have now. So it's bot, mid, top, jungle, team, and support in that order, in general. But if, you know, use your brain. If things are kind of panning out weird in your draft, you need to adjust your strategy accordingly. So let's go through some detailed stuff, and then I'll get back to this page, and I'll basically kind of go back over this and kind of run through the tier lists and things like that. So this is all the data from the spring split for the teams. So you can see I've got the point values week 1 through week 9, and then this is their average points, and then this is their value for each one of those weeks and their average value, and then they've got the consistency over here. Hotter colors are better, colder colors are worse, so like reds and oranges and yellows are better, greens are average, blues and purples are worse. So you can see that in general, you know, TSM doing pretty decent, surprisingly, considering that, you know, they kind of struggled a lot, but they're still a pretty good pickup. Your best bet, 100 Thieves, Fnatic's the best overall, and also very consistent and very high value. So those are kind of your big picks. You can see a lot of these other teams, they've definitely have some pretty bad weeks overall. So you can kind of get a sense for which teams are more consistent, which teams give you more value, just by looking at a lot of these numbers. But we'll when we get to the final tier list, I'll kind of run down who I think you should be picking up. Top lane. Let's take a look at this. So again, general stuff. You can see that Wonder is, I believe, the best. Yeah, he's got the highest points, and you can see he scores really, really highly. Huni's kind of in that number 2 spot. So the difference between Wonder and Huni is that Wonder, on average, scores slightly more points, but Huni's more consistent with his points week in and week out. So if you're looking for more consistency, you want to go more towards the Huni. If you're looking for like those really, really high point scores in a given week, but you're taking a little bit more risk because Wonder also scores less points on bad weeks, then you're looking at Wonder. Fari had a few good weeks. Hanser had a few good weeks, but he also had some really horrible weeks. General, those are kind of like your top picks in top lane. Jungle, here's all the stats for jungle. If I'm going too fast, you can always pause the video and take a screenshot, whatever you want to do. Dardoch, I think, was the top here, 33.87 points. High value. Consistency is a little bit weird, and that mainly is because he got some really, really high points. So actually, like, him popping off can actually drop his consistency. But you can see that he never scored less than like average points. But as far as his value was concerned, sometimes he was below average on his value. Other really good players: Broxa, Yankos, Sven Skaren, Max Lore. Those are kind of your big picks, your heavy hitters for the jungle. Mid lane, Phoenix was top dog as far as points are concerned. Had a really good week too, but definitely also had some consistency issues. Bjergsen was actually surprisingly consistent, though he did have some bad weeks. Jensen, Huhi actually was pretty high. Fevbin was pretty high. Caps was actually not as high as you would expect for a Fnatic player. You can see his value is only around 90%. Perks got a lot of points. That's about it. Exile and Unicorn to Love. Unicorn to Love actually puts up a lot of points overall, so definitely keep your eye on Unicorn to Love players. Bot lane, again, Echo Fox, Altec. Cody's Sun, massive amounts of points, very consistent as well. Who else? Who else is pretty good? Oh yeah, Samex, Unicorn to Love, 119% of his value, but kind of average points. And of course, Reckless, he's going to probably be first round, first pick for most drafts, I would expect. If you get a chance to grab him, I probably would. And then, of course, Hajarnen did well. He was above average. Finally, for support, again, another Echo Fox player. Adrian was the top point scorer. But Smoothie, Biofrost also did really well. Hillisang, Wadid, Mickey, those are kind of all your top dogs that you're looking for. So that's basically all the data. So you guys can see how much work goes into this, and this is just a fraction of the stuff that I do. There's a bunch of other behind the scenes calculations that I do to basically get you to this. This is kind of the master sheet that I kind of want to share with you guys and let you guys have a takeaway. So I've kind of you can see I've color coded a little bit. So the black by the players' names, that indicates that those are like the top 8. So most fantasy leagues, you're looking at either a top 6 or a top 8. So those are most likely going to be your starters. The players that are in the gray are people that could be like a flex or a bench spot, things like that. And then the ones that are kind of the normal gray, the darker gray, are kind of ones, yeah, you can keep your eye on them, but you don't necessarily need to pick them up in the drafting phase. But if they look like they're going to pop off, then you definitely want to take a look at it. So let's go into a little bit more detail on all this stuff. So for your teams, Fnatic, hands down the best. Scored the highest, very consistent, high value. After them, TSM. Scored very high, high value, high consistency, and 100 Thieves. Those are kind of your top 3. Echo Fox is also doing really well. I think they actually would have been a lot higher if they didn't kind of fall off at the end of the split. So I know a lot of people are going to try and pick up the Echo Fox team early. G2, Cloud9, Splice, Vitality, all of these teams are expected to do well, and they would be good pickups for your team spot in the draft. If you're looking for kind of like the borderline teams, you're looking at Clutch and Team Liquid. Even though Team Liquid performed very well in the spring split, they won the spring split, their fantasy points do not reflect that at all. They do not get very good fantasy points. So that's why you'll see that a lot of the Team Liquid players are very low across all positions on my list. And then the rest of the players, or the rest of the teams, I'd keep my eye on Unicorn to Love. I'd keep my eye on CLG. Those are kind of the 2 teams that potentially could kind of pop off and might be underrated. Unicorn's Love is notorious for putting up high amounts of points when they win. So yeah, keep an eye on that. Top lane, Wunder and Huni. Those are your 2 best players. We already talked about the differences between them. If you can't get your hands on Wunder or Huni, you're looking for Licorice, Hanser, Alfari, and actually surprisingly Darshan. Even though CLG did really, really badly last split, Darshan put up a lot of points compared to like what you would expect him to. His value was 115%, which is one of the highest values in the league. So definitely keep your eye on CLG. They might be a good person to pick up in like a backup spot or just keep your eye on them. Cabo Shard, Vitality players actually didn't score as high as you would expect, considering how their season went. Even when they were like popping off and going, you know, beating everybody, they weren't getting as high fantasy points as you would expect. And then Someday kind of flew under the radar. But yeah, he's definitely also a good pick. As far as like your second top laner spots, Flame, Soaz, Ruin, Odo, Impact, Lorlo. Surprisingly, Lorlo, really, really high value. Too bad Golden Guardians is not a very good team. But if Golden Guardians has a really good week, 1 week, you might want to pick up Lorlo if you don't have another good top laner. I would be wary about picking up Soaz because, you know, there's the whole top lane drama going on with Fnatic. So just keep that in mind with Soaz. I'm not saying don't pick him up, but just be aware of that. Jungle, Dardoch, Yankos, Broxa. Those are kind of the big three. Dardoch is the best, just statistically. Sven Sagarin, Max Lore, Cold, Reignover, Mike Young. Those are kind of all people that are kind of vying for your starter spot at jungle. As far as backup, if you decide to grab a backup jungler, Xerxes, Meteos, Smithy, Joko, Memento, and Amazing, surprisingly. So Amazing is new for Schalke. We'll see how well he does. But he could be a potential sleeper pick. You can see like Lyra. I know people are hyped up on Lyra, and I think Lyra is amazing, but he didn't really show up as far as the fantasy points are concerned. So he's not that high up on the list, unfortunately. Mid lane, Phoenix scored the highest points. After him, Perks, Jensen, Bjergsen. Those are kind of your next three. Huhi from CLG scored extremely high, considering how badly CLG performed. I know I've said this multiple times, but 120%. So Huhi, definitely a sleeper pick that you might want to pick up. Caps, Fevivin, Blanc are kind of rounding it out. Caps scored decent points, but you can see that his value is below 100%. So he definitely was underperforming. He did pop off a lot during MSI though, so maybe, you know, he's just, you know, still growing as a player. He's still a very young player, so I wouldn't necessarily write off Caps. Just keep in mind that in Spring Split his value was not very high. As far as backups, your flex picks, things like that, Senkux, Power of Evil, Exile, Jizuki, Pobelter, Ryu. So I know people are going to freak out at me because Jizuki, Pobelter, Ryu are all kind of down there, but just look at their point values, right? They all scored average or below average points. They didn't have high value scores. Their consistencies were pretty decent, but they didn't really pop off a lot of their weeks. So that's why I can't rate them higher than that, unfortunately. Bot lane, Reckless. I mean, yeah, he's the best player. You can see he dominated Fantasy LCS. 44 points on average per week. Nobody else comes close to that. I mean, Altec was the only other person who got above 40 points per week at 40.4 points. And I know people hate on Altec a lot, but he puts up the fantasy points. So definitely keep your eye on him. And the other one, Cody-san. I know people hate on Cody-san. He put up a ton of fantasy points. 37 fantasy points on average per week. And then Hajarnan, I know, same thing with Hajarnan. Hajarnan's definitely underrated. And as far as your other starters, Hansama, Samex, Tixay, and Sneaky. And people are saying, what about Sven? What about Double Lift? You know, what about Apollo? Those kind of players. Sorry, they didn't put up the stats. I'm not saying don't pick them up. I know there's going to be plenty of people who are going to pick up Sven, Double Lift immediately. First round pick, you know, right at the top of the draft. I don't think I'm going to, personally. They haven't shown to me that they can put up those fantasy points. Their value scores are low. They haven't really popped off in games. I think that Sven and Double Lift are going to score a lot higher this split than they did last split. But if it's a choice between Reckless and Sven or Altec and Double Lift, I'm going with the people that have a proven track record over the people that I want to succeed or that I think are really good or that I think might pop off. I want to go for those sure bets. And then finally for support, Adrian. Adrian was the top point scorer. Smoothie and Hillsang came close. Mickey's amazing. He, like, every single split, I tell people this guy puts up a lot of fantasy points for his support, 121% value. Unfortunately, Misfit struggled a little bit, but he put up a lot of fantasy points, so he's definitely somebody to keep your eye on. What did in Biofrost? Again, another CLG player. Even though CLG had a bad split, put up a ton of fantasy points. So I definitely think that CLG is one of those sleeper teams that you might be able to steal a lot of CLG players, and without sacrificing a lot of your high draft picks, and you can get a pretty strong team from that. And then rounding it out, Mithy and Norskaren. Norskaren, Rockcat. I know people hate on Rockcat, but Blanca and Norskaren put up a lot of fantasy points on their team, even though their team as a whole struggled. For kind of like the borderline people, Totoro and Hakuo. Totoro was amazing on Unicorns of Love, put up tons of fantasy points. Hakuo, I think people are finally wising up to how good he is. The rest of them, unfortunately, I'm most likely going to bypass them, at least in the drafting phase. I know people are going to yell at me for Aframu and Ollie being down there, but I mean, the stats don't lie. They don't put up the fantasy points. So even though I think they're amazing players, and they're obviously, some of the best players in the NALCS, they don't put up the fantasy points, unfortunately, so I won't be drafting them, at least on my fantasy team. So anyway, those are my basic rundown. I tried to keep this as short as possible. Just as a public service announcement, I'm going out of the country very soon. Going to be going all over Europe, and then I'm moving. And when I come back to the States, I'm going to be moving locally, but I got to move to a different house. So basically, there's going to be, like a 5 or 6 week period where I'm not going to be able to put out fantasy LCS videos. So this is pretty much the only video you're going to see me make on a fantasy LCS until around the middle of the split. Of course, I will have my Discord available. You can ask me questions on my Discord, and I will do my best to answer them. So that's another incentive for you guys to join the Discord. Please join fantasy leagues if you want to play with me. Like I said, if you beat me in a fantasy league, if you win one of my fantasy leagues, then I'll give you a special role in my Discord that changes the color of your name. And you get to keep that as long as you keep winning in my fantasy leagues. And of course, I always will try and answer your guys' questions. So definitely leave a comment, leave a like. If you haven't subscribed yet and you enjoy this content, please subscribe. And I hope you all have a fantastic day. I wish you the best of luck in all of your fantasy drafts. This is Randomonium signing off.